I think that for the quite foreseeable future, the business case for hydrogen will primarily be for the big users. And given that's true, I think that centralized production of hydrogen makes more sense. Because I think that just fundamentally, to use hydrogen as a fuel, so go from electricity to hydrogen and then from hydrogen to electricity, it's just incredibly inefficient.
Hello and welcome to Energy Unplugged by Aurora. This podcast features various experts from Aurora having in-depth conversations with key industry leaders, policymakers and academics from all over the world. It explores the hottest topics across the energy market and gives a unique perspective on major energy issues.
Welcome to Energy Unplugged, a podcast by Aurora Energy Research. I'm Alexander Esser and I've been with Aurora for 5 years and lead our expansion into the Nordics. I'm extremely excited about today's conversation. I'll be speaking with a guest who's the head of strategy and member of the group management of the largest generator of zero-carbon electricity in the Nordics. He's also chairman of a joint venture producing green steel. My guest on the show is Andreas Regnell from Vattenfall. Welcome, Andreas.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
By the way of broader background, Andrea has been at the strategy department of Vattenfall for 10 years, which he's now leading. Prior, he was managing partner for the Nordics at BCG. He was banker earlier in his career and holds a degree in economics. He also loves triathlon and runs the Ironman. So, Andreas, what was your personal journey in the power sector?
As you mentioned, I worked as a consultant for quite some years, and there was some scattered projects there. So the real journey within the energy industry did not start until I joined Vattenfall 10 years ago.
All right. And where did you draw your inspiration to enter the power sector during this time?
I think that one of the things that it's always interesting to be in a place, a happening place, if you want. And it was very clear to me that the energy sector would be, and it has always been, but it would be even more of a place where with strong change and transformation. And that's why I thought that joining Vattenfall when the opportunity arose was a very interesting step to take. So of course, reality exceeded expectations by a factor of 10 or so, because we all know that 10 years ago we could no way have foreseen how dramatic it actually became, the change.
Yes, and I think Vattenfall is definitely one of the most interesting companies for such a transformation. I mean, it's an energy provider owned by the Swedish state. It underwent the first transformation already back in the 90s when it became international with activities across Europe. Now it undergoes the second transformation by decarbonizing its power generation. So, Andreas, on the Vattenfall homepage, I read that Vattenfall wants to enable fossil-free living within one generation. What specifically does that mean?
The purpose of the purpose, if you want, is that to set out a very clear direction. Rather than saying a specific year and exactly how, it's really our clear ambition of that direction. And I think it served us extremely well because everything we do must fit that purpose. And we talking about transformation. When I joined Vattenfall 10 years ago, we were still one of the biggest owners of lignite in Europe. So we also need to remember how Vattenfall has transformed, and having such a very clear and ambitious purpose has helped us tremendously in aligning the organization and creating an engagement in the organization. So now we're very proud of the engagement levels we have, and of course it's not only because of our purpose, but I think there is a significant building block in creating that drive in the organization.
Yeah, but setting this really clear purpose and targeting zero emissions, was it easier for state-owned companies like Vattenfall?
A very good question. I think it's never easy for organization to make a 100-degree turn. And why I say 100-degree turn, that I remember 10 years ago, we have formulated what was then, when I came in, that we had a new strategic direction. And at the time, that the new strategic direction, one of the components of that we would not invest more in coal. And that was a major step not to invest more in coal. 10 years ago. And we all know how fast things have gone since then. But I would say that our owner, the Swedish state, we run like any other company. So it doesn't make any difference. The difference, I think, one could point out is that the Swedish owner has always been quite ambitious in terms of sustainability and climate. So if anything, it made it slightly easier because we got a very strong support. You can even, some would argue, push from the owner to make that transformation and formulate those type of objectives. And the purpose is, of course, something that the owner is incredibly happy about.
Yeah. But how can we imagine are those decisions actually made? So, I mean, you mentioned 10 years ago not to invest in further coal assets. Then we had the divestment from lignite in Germany. More recently, also in Germany, a decision to close down a hard coal plant. So is this a government decree or a board decision as we have in public companies, or a negotiation between both of them?
Formally, it's in the end the board decisions, the big decision, but that's just formally. I think one could write a book about decision making in large corporations, and I have something I call a critical mass of conviction, which is so you need some sort of process within a big organism like Vattenfall, so that there is enough belief in a certain direction, because you will find people within Vattenfall that 10 years ago said that we should go out of all coal we owned, but you would have found many more people saying that we cannot do that because it's providing all of our cash flows, and so it's really, the trick is to make that decision making, the corporate decision making process, as fast as possible. And of course, an important factor is the CEO and the top leadership, how progressive they are and how much they dare to push questions that they don't necessarily have anchored in all the levels below. But I would say that, so the owner directive for us was a component. The heritage in the Swedish system, where we had actually a relatively fossil-free system already at the outset, all those components together made us mature to take the decision to formulate the purpose about 4 or 5 years ago. So formally, yes, it's the board of directors. In reality, it's a corporate process that takes years to go through if you want a big corporate to make a 180-degree turn. I mean, we could see what the oil majors are doing right now. They are where we were a few, I would say 6-7 years ago, that I'm sure you will find people within the oil majors that say we have to go out of oil as fast as we possibly can, because they will just be stranded assets. And when everyone understands that, they will for sure be stranded assets. So we need to move faster than everyone else. That's the way to get as much value out of our existing assets as possible. There will be people saying that. There will be other people saying, no way, we cannot do that, because they are providing all of our cash and the returns of the new assets are just so low. The equation doesn't really work. So we have to go slowly. And I'm not saying that any of them are right, but that I can promise that discussion already exists. And the future will tell us how far. Some of the companies will go faster, some will go slower. So you can go through, I mean, the media industry went that 15 years ago. So it's something, and it's difficult to make it fast if you're an incumbent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's exactly what I wanted to pick up. The oil majors such as BP or Shell with no government involvement. I mean, they're missing this component. That could be a reason why they had in the past a more difficult time to commit to such ambitious decarbonization targets.
But I think the financial market is ambitious, not necessarily because of a kind of conviction to save the world. Some of it has that conviction too. It's just that they're very rational, and they essentially think forward and say, wait a minute, if we own this share and there will be kind of a negative, and we all know Gordon's growth formula. If you change the growth part of it, the multiple of the stock goes down relatively fast. So I think even though they're not government owned, I think the shareholders and the large investment funds out there might be just as ambitious and as the government, or has just as much pushing effect as the governments, but from a slightly different underlying reason, but it's in the same direction.
Yeah, and replace this kind of component that they're missing. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Now we talked a lot about the transition to fossil-free power, but with a net zero system in mind, this is not enough. Just simply because there are quite a few areas that cannot be decarbonized by green electricity. So let's talk about hydrogen. And I know you guys were really ahead of your game. You were active in the space already for many years. So I remember Magnus Hall, your former CEO at our Spring Forum in 2018, already talking about steel from hydrogen. So what's Vattenfall's activity in the hydrogen space?
They are manifold, but the one that most people know about is what you're just referring to, which is the hybrid joint venture between Vattenfall, LKAB, a state-owned mining company, and SSAB, a leading Swedish steel company, specialist steel company. And what we are aiming for is to do the world's first completely fossil-free steel or iron reduction system or production process that in the end will, once we've addressed the whole value chain, we'll have fossil-free steel. But this is the most emitting part, which is the iron ore reduction process that is today made in blast furnaces, that we will then do instead of using coke, we will use hydrogen. And if you take hydrogen and combine with oxygen in the iron ore, you get water instead of carbon dioxide, which you get today using coke. So we have developed a pilot plant, a pretty big building actually that you can see in Luleå if you fly in there. It's 65 meters high, and we've just managed to get our first successful trials in that pilot plant. We're still using natural gas because just to calibrate the plant, but later this spring we will start the trials with pure hydrogen.
Okay. I want to come back to the technical details of the setup and of the hydrogen economy in a bit. But maybe taking a step back, you have this prototype now already going. So it means a few years ago you already made this decision to enter the hydrogen space long before others actually thought about it. So was it hard to make this decision, let's say 5-6 years ago?
It wasn't. I mean, and to be fair, the initiative came from the steel company SSAB and the head of R&D there, Martin Pei, that convinced his CEO Martin Lindqvist that if we want to be in the steel industry, and that's what we do, for there to be a steel industry in 2050, we need to have fossil-free steel, and then we need to do this. Essentially. So, and I would say it's coming back to the decision-making, corporate decision-making. I think I sometimes refer to it, the difference between the backcasting and a forecasting perspective. If you do forecasting, you stand today, you see a goal somewhere there, but you're restricted by all of the realities of today. You have a balance sheet, you have a CFO that says you have to reach your targets, you have to business cases to be able to get your investment funds, and just that you're also kind of your reference is what has been possible previously. So, and then you put together a plan, and it's typically quite ambitious, and you reach a certain trajectory. If you, on the other hand, put yourself to where you need to be, which in this case is climate neutrality by 2050, and then you figure out what you need to do today to get to that point, and that's what I call backcasting. You get to a very different trajectory, given how urgent things are. So so I think that's a bit where in this case then the senior management of SSAB, they put themselves in a backcasting shoes, and they say, okay, we're in the steel industry, we want to stay in the steel industry, and it's obvious that where the world is going, and if we need fossil-free steel by 2050, so how do we do that? And then they came up with this idea. They contacted LKAB and Vattenfall, and we were quite keen to join them. It's very exciting. But I mean, at the time, I wouldn't say that we were made fun of, but almost. There was a kind of a crazy idea of the.
Yeah, I can imagine. It probably was not part of any forecasts in any.
For sure, not part of any forecast. And then so we then, and that's of course the challenge for anyone that starts that journey on that, if you want the backcasting journey, because you will do things that all the forecasters think is crazy. And I think on that note, I think what Europe did in 2020 was to go from forecasting to backcasting, because I think that Green Deal is the manifestation of that change. Because the Green Deal is it really takes the backcasting perspective. We need to be somewhere by 2050, and what do we then need to do today? And I don't know how many of you that have really read through the Green Deal, but it's, on the one hand, you get completely exhausted by all the things that is in that Green Deal and all the things you have to essentially fix. On the other hand, when you read it through, at least I think that you get the impression that it is actually well thought through, that there is no way around it. We have to do all that. And once you take that as the reality and start working on it, suddenly you do different things. So I happen to believe that it's incredibly commercial, and the most strategically kind of best way to go forward is to put yourself in a backcasting mode. And then you might do some sort of reality checks, but I mean, as soon as you're convinced that somehow the world must reach climate neutrality, with some bumps in the road, then the only way you can do is to take that perspective and look and do backcasting rather than forecasting. And because I think the number of, if you as one criteria, the amount of billions of impaired assets, I think will actually be higher for the forecasters than for the backcasters, because the backcasters will have time to adjust. The forecasters will not have time to adjust once reality is hitting them. Because the problem is that the backcasters hit into the question of impairment much earlier than the forecasters. But the end result will be much worse and that's part of the, I think, this corporate decision making or critical mass of conviction, that if you start taking the backcasting perspective, it gets really scary.
Yeah, indeed. And it also has a huge implication on what is the lifetime to assume for any kind of investment in fossil technologies. So if you build a gas-fired CHP, or also like in your personal life buy a diesel-fueled car, like what is the lifetime expectancy you can actually still run this kind of asset?
What the example you just brought up, the private car, I think is the most obvious example of the forecasting versus backcasting in close to you as an individual.
Maybe now coming back to the hybrid prototype. So it's quite interesting to see that it's actually on site at industry, that it's next to the SSRB iron reduction unit. We also observe other setups like that. So I saw that you're planning to build a electrolyzer in the Hamburg harbor. So is that the future, to have actually green production next to the off-taker, next to industry? And is it superior to decentral production or a production close to the supply centers?
I mean, and that's a $1 million question, but if you ask me today, I would say yes, because I mean, in essence, is it cheaper to move around electrons or molecules? It's cheaper and easier. And going back to, depends a bit if you have a very decentralized use, because if you have a very decentralized use, it might make sense to have a decentralized production, because then you need a network like the electricity network. However, my view is that the majority of the hydrogen molecules that we will be using are in those use cases where you actually need hydrogen, the molecule. So for example, the steel industry, the refinery industry, the chemical industry, and all of those, they can't do without hydrogen. They already, I mean, if you look at the refinery and the chemical, they already use hydrogen. They just need to switch from natural gas-based hydrogen to green or fossil-free hydrogen, which is a huge change, or a huge electricity need to meet that. And then you add the steel on that. So given that, I think that for the quite foreseeable future, the business case for hydrogen will primarily be for the big users. And given that's true, I think that centralized production of hydrogen makes more sense. Because I think that just fundamentally, to use hydrogen as a fuel, so go from electricity to hydrogen and then from hydrogen to electricity, it's just incredibly inefficient. So anything that you can electrify directly rather than going via hydrogen, you will electrify directly. Yeah, and it goes through the same thing. If you can heat something with electricity, and nowadays you can go to 1,000 degrees. So today, and that continuously developing. So today, if you need something to be 1,500 degrees, it's a bit difficult to do it with electricity, especially if it's large volume. So then you need to essentially burn something instead. But if you then have that as a case, you get you get an incredibly loss of efficiency if you go via electricity to hydrogen and then burn it again. So the value in developing technologies where you can electrify directly is enormous. But that was a long answer to yes, I believe centralized production, because I believe there will be primarily centralized consumption.
Yeah, that's a very clear statement. And I think that also will have an implication on hydrogen imports, also, let's say, European or even global trade of hydrogen, because what I often think about is also the competition between blue and green hydrogen, especially in the Scandinavian context, with having Norway as a direct neighbor to Sweden, with likely available blue hydrogen at a cheaper price than green. So how do you see that? Is that going to be a competition from blue hydrogen, or does the argument that there will not be much transportation of hydrogen speak against it already?
I mean, even if you believe in centralized production and consumption, you could, if you have like a big consumption hub, you can still in theory transport hydrogen, but it would still not be in a very decentralized way. It would be kind of big freight routes.
From A to B, just from
yeah, exactly.
From Northern Lights to Luleå.
Yeah, exactly. However, I do believe that the jury is really out on blue hydrogen, and I really don't know what the answer will be, whether it will be accepted, because CCS. I mean, nuclear is a bit emotional, but I think that the S in CCS is almost as emotional. So I just don't know where we will end up on that, because I do think that you're right, that blue hydrogen has cost advantages versus at least green hydrogen. It has to do with logistics and stuff, but I think it's quite likely that blue hydrogen will have cost advantages in certain situations, and will it then be accepted or not? Mm-hmm. And then another, so for example, if you think about how the European energy system will need to be reach the security supply level it wants to reach, or to keep essentially the level it has today, with one way or the other, you need flex. And the question is, will that flex then be batteries? Difficult to, because you actually need energy and flex. It's not only flex, and you need so high number of megawatts that batteries are probably just going to be too expensive. Storage, maybe other types of storage, maybe. So, but I think at least today it's hard to foresee that a system where you don't need a significant number of some sort of CCGTs. And then the question is, will you then do CCS at the source in the Norwegian oil gas fields, or will you do CCS at the site of the gas turbine? So that will you deposit the CO2 straight at the source when you take the gas up from underground, or will you freight natural gas in existing infrastructure with existing ships and unknown technology, and then do CCS at the production site, the CCGT, and then bring the CO2 back to Norway? Or will you not do CCS at all? Because if you don't need to do CCS at all, then you need some technology development, or you need to live with a very high cost of first making electricity and then do hydrogen. and the heating sector, it's just difficult to see how you can charge so much to the customers that you would need to if you want to take that route. But jury's out.
Yeah, it's a very interesting comparison. I mean, there's probably one chemical component to it. If it's cheaper to capture the CO2 before the combustion or after the combustion, I think there we have a clear picture. But I think once green hydrogen really enters the market, then this whole dynamics will change anyway, and especially if green hydrogen becomes down to the same price level as blue hydrogen.
Yeah, but every year that the gas fields can produce is a kind of a good year. so even if blue hydrogen is not the solution that will be there forever, I'm sure that there will be strong economic interest to add, if you want, 10 years on their lifetime.
Yeah. But I assume, coming back to hybrid, such a prototype requires state support. So how does this work at the moment? And is that actually also a concept for other European jurisdictions?
Yes, I clearly think so. I mean, to be clear, the financing to date has only been of the pilot plant, and that is so far about 150 million euro. And a bit simplified, we paid the SSAB, LKAB, and Vattenfall. We put in one quarter each, and then the government has supported us with 1 quarter.
So it's like a capex support.
It's a capex support primarily, but it's actually, I mean, it's the 1.5 is capex and opex, but the big piece is capex. But so they essentially supported with 1 quarter. And then when we talk about the next step, a demo plant, then we talk about the €1 billion plus. And then, I mean, there are many different potential sources of support, but it's very clear that there is a need for support because it's a big technical development part of scaling it up. Yeah, there are many risks associated with it. And just as an example, the electrolyzers that we need to buy will still be in the very early phase of the scale curve. So they will essentially, we will need to buy, relatively speaking, expensive electrolyzers. And then a few years down the road, they will be much cheaper. So anyone that builds this plant, a second plant or a third plant, will have significantly lower capex. And we kind of know that. And to be then competitive, because the first demo plant will be kind of a commercial size, we need to support for that as well. So there are many reasons why there is a need to support. But of course, the initiative will also put in money. So it's not like we will not invest, but they need, because it's meant, the whole idea is to make it into a combined learning journey, but then also at the end of the learning, maybe a year or two after commissioning, it will be a fully commercial plant, and then it should be kind of run on its own merits.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I read from the big plan. So on the homepage, it says, if successful, hybrid means that together we can reduce Sweden's CO2 emissions by 10% and Finland's by 7%. So that really means that then the whole steel sector in both of those countries runs on such a concept. Okay.
Yeah, and related to hybrid, the mining company LKAB, they of course export even more iron ore than only to SSAB. So they have announced that they want to take kind of a step forward in the value chain, and actually make all of their current iron ore and export it instead of exported as pellets that they do today, which is essentially iron ore in a different format, into iron sponge instead. So having done the reduction step in Nordics and then taking one step further in the value chain, and then export that iron sponge or HBI to electric arc furnaces then across primarily Europe. And that would be then taking out much more CO2 than Sweden's combined CO2 today.
Wow, yeah, that's
because essentially kind of taking out emissions from blast furnaces currently standing outside of Sweden.
Okay. Those are ambitious plans. So good luck with that. Just to wrap up, I want to come to our section overrated or underrated. So I don't want to miss out on the opportunity to ask you on a few concepts in the energy transition. Some we have already touched upon, some are new. So I will ask you now if you think those concepts are overrated or underrated. Don't feel the pressure to elaborate on your response. Short answers are the best. So the first concept is the role of battery electric vehicles in providing flexibility to the power grid. Do you think this concept is overrated or underrated?
Overrated.
Overrated. The second concept, hydrogen as a transport fuel.
Overrated.
we had this already. Yeah, that is also aligned with the analysis that we do, at least for the personal transport. Third
Yes.
concept, hydrogen converted back into electricity. Overrated or underrated?
Super overrated.
Super overrated. Okay. So you don't see any chance for a CCGT running on hydrogen or on synthetic methane to provide low carbon dispatchable power?
I do see any chance, but that's not where the debate is today.
Yeah.
The debate is as if it's the savior of flex in Europe, and that I do not believe in. So it's given where I believe the debate is. I'm sure there will be few peak hours being done that way, but so it's not non-existent, it's just overrated.
Yeah, it's just for really the peaking hours where really high short-run marginal costs don't really play a role.
Yeah.
My last concept, energy companies setting zero emission targets.
Underrated yet. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's a natural time to wrap up. We are really going to be watching your progress. I think it will have huge implications for the Nordics, for Germany, but also for the rest of Europe. So Andreas, thank you so much for today. Stort tack för idag, and hopefully speak to you soon.
Thanks. Really enjoyed this. Thanks a lot, Alexander.
Hej då.
Hej då.
That was Alexander Esser, who leads Aurora's expansion into the Nordics, speaking to Andreas Regnell, Senior Vice President, Head of Strategic Development at Vattenfall. Do keep an eye on our podcast feed for more in-depth conversations with senior members of the energy industry. The best way to do this is to subscribe on whatever platform you use. Thanks for listening and goodbye.